the Premier was adamant that he did not feel it would be useful to have 3 levels of politicians sitting around a table.
And did he say why he didn't think that was going to be, that wasn't necessary or helpful?
Well, I think he felt it would be a waste of time. When he said that, I was quite frustrated with him. He said, look, what's it going to accomplish? A bunch of people sitting around a table talking and making decisions. And I said, well, that sounds like a cabinet meeting. And he didn't like that. But at the end of the day, it was his call. If he wasn't going to go to force his minister to go to the meeting or not go to the meeting, he just said they're not going to be part of it.
There you go. That's Mayor Jim Watson testifying at the inquiry into the Emergencies Act today. Tom Mulcair standing by. Our feature brought to you by Guaranteed Industries. Tom, that seems to me like a pretty clear indictment of Doug Ford.
Well, yes, but it's also a little bit of personal rear-end covering from Mayor Watson. Because the core reason that they got there was abject incompetence at City Hall. So nothing easier now than to throw out a vindictive shot at Doug Ford. He had to fire his chief of police right in the middle of this event that shut down his whole city because he was not in charge of anything. And the mayor wasn't in charge of anything, and he was bouncing around. And in one of his answers today, I found it so revealing. He said, well, that's what you do. You call other people and tell them what they should be doing. No, Mayor Watson, you were the mayor. You were the magistrate in charge of that city. You had a lot of power, and you didn't get anything done. So it's a bit, I think it's a bit weak for him to be saying, it's Doug Ford's fault because he didn't want to do this, and it's somebody else's fault, but it's certainly not my fault. No, Mr. Watson, you bear a very large part of the blame, so stop blaming other people. It's too easy.
Okay, so I have 2 questions. Wasn't there an issue of jurisdiction at play? And then secondly, are you defending Doug Ford?
Well, first of all, with regard to jurisdiction, who has jurisdiction over the trucks that are coming into Ottawa, if not the Ottawa police? And there is something called the precinct that is under the control. Like, for example, when they decided they couldn't get back in on time to have a legislative session on a Sunday to move some of the emergency stuff, that was a decision of the precinct officers who are in charge of Parliament, so they're a separate force. But with regard to everything that happens on the streets of Ottawa, that's under the force of the Ottawa Police. With regard to defending, I don't find it's my job. I'll let people decide what they hear and how they think of it. I don't think it's my job to defend or attack anybody. But what I can sometimes do is look at the facts on the table based on my, many years of experience and say, okay, well, based on what I've seen in the past and from Mayor Watson, whom I happen to know and I consider a very nice guy, but I can also say that I consider this, this is rear-end covering and very conveniently by Mayor Watson.
Well, can I just add, Tom, would it be fair to say there's enough failure at every level of government here to go around?
Yes. But the real question, and this is where the advice and the counsel that comes out of this commission is going to matter a lot for the future, because I always try to tell people, try to consider the commissioner, the commission that Rouleau is presiding, more as a coroner's inquest. Okay, a coroner is there to look at the causes and the circumstances of a death. Well, of course, here we're looking at the causes and circumstances that led to the enactment of the Emergencies Act. Its invocation was it reasonable under the circumstances? I remain convinced, and I haven't heard anything to contradict my gut feeling that Judge Rouleau will say it was necessary. There was nothing else that was left in the toolbox that could be used except that. But where he's going to drill down, and this is why I sensed yesterday with that senior official from the City of Ottawa, and again today with Mayor Watson, they're trying to paper this over and say it wasn't their fault. And they want the Rouleau Commission of Inquiry to say that they had tried and nobody else was doing their job, but they were. I don't think that that's going to be a fair reading. I think what Rouleau is going to say is this thing was allowed to fester. The police force had incredibly good officers and unbelievably bad leadership, and City Hall was particularly weak, and that led to a situation where the feds had no other choice but to bring in the Emergencies Act.
I think that you just exactly.
Yeah,
I'm just going to say
okay.
Exactly, Tom. And yes, you bring a wealth of experience, and that you just nailed it right there, in my opinion.
I asked the question earlier, and I'm going to move off this topic, Tom. But at the end of the day, what do we end up? What does this thing end up resolving 6 weeks later? All the people who testified, all the finger pointing that went on, and what gets determined here? What changes?
There'll be a roadmap. There'll be a list of 28 things to take into account the next time cabinet. Let's hope that it's not for another 40 years. But the next time cabinet really has to look at a situation where there's nothing left. There's no other move left except the invocation of the Emergencies Act. I think that Mr. Justice Rouleau will have given a roadmap. He'll say, okay, but here are the sharp objects. Here are the bumps in the road. This is where the potholes are. Be careful. Don't take this corner too quickly. So he'll give wise advice based on the 6 weeks testimony, and he'll make an observation as to whether or not it was fair and it was the only thing that could be done. And he'll say, who got what right and who got what wrong. It's very summary. Just the question of the city of Ottawa could have taken 6 weeks. Let's not kid ourselves. And so even though I do find Mayor Watson lacking generally in how he handled this, and I do find it a bit pusillanimous to just say, it's everybody else except me. That aside, I think that the city of Ottawa should have been given a lot more days, and I think the commission should have been allowed to drill it down a lot more on what Ottawa didn't do. But we're going to see there are other layers that are going to be peeled back. Doug Ford might just ask to be heard during this thing after all, because he wasn't convened. He wasn't, asked in as a witness. Trudeau's been asked to come in. Doug Ford had not been, from any information I've been able to see anyway. So I think at some point, if he thinks that, he was the object of an unfair shot from Watson, he might just decide to step in.
I mean, I feel like on the whole, he's been trying to stay out of it as much as possible. We were both very...
I think that's very good counsel from the people around him. Right. It's what people remember, go back to you remember the Charbonneau Commission, you remember the one saying, my sidewalks are like this, or a chum, c'est un chum, and all of the, the ne'er-do-wells squirming under the lights. That's what you don't want to have people remembering you as.
Okay, we were both just very impressed with your vocabulary as well.
That's right. It's not every day, Tom, someone uses the word pusillanimous here on the show, so we were very impressed by that.
We're very, very impressed. And then that leads me to the next topic, a piece you wrote in ctvnews.ca about clientelism or client. That's also a new word to me in politics, and how Pierre Poilievre is very skilled at it. So tell us more.
Well, he gave an example over the weekend, and it's interesting. It was only in La Presse. I didn't sign any English media because I linked to the La Presse story. So basically he said this. Look, we don't need the federal government doing environmental assessments of major projects. This just in, the Supreme Court says the federal government has the obligation, not just the jurisdiction, but has the obligation in terms of protecting the environment to carry out full assessments. We've got relatively new legislation brought in by the Trudeau Liberals about 4 years ago. It's quite complete. It's quite good. And on a case like the big LNG project up in Saguenay, they've already given an opinion and they've given it thumbs down. Now, what he is doing as clientelism, you could call it pandering, what Poilievre is saying is, I don't think the federal government should make any studies anymore on environment for big projects in Quebec. If Mr. Legault wants to dam another river, that's fine with me, as long as he does it with a study by the Quebec BAP, the famous Bureau d'Audience Publique en Environnement, which is the environmental public hearing board that we have here in the province. And so he would withdraw the constitutional duty of the federal government to look at things that are under federal jurisdiction, like the St. Lawrence River, like the Saguenay River. Those are big navigable waterways that belong to all of us. They're under the jurisdiction of the federal government, first and foremost. Environment is a shared jurisdiction. And for the purpose of trying to buy some votes and thinking that if he puts himself on the side of Legault on this one, because Legault says he wants a new project, he wants to dam a new river, and that's going to be part of the fight with Sophie Brochu at Hydro-Quebec. So I find that clientelism where he's saying, I've got a product, I want to sell you. My product is the Conservative Party under my leadership. Mm-hmm. And here's how I'm going to get your votes. I'm going to not only tell you what you want to hear, but I'm going to give you a project and a way of doing things that I believe is in sync with what you want, even if it's not in the public interest or the interest of the economy or the interest of the environment.
Tom, we're going to run out of time. I've not heard anything about this, and I see it's on the list today. So a donor from the federal Liberals has signed leases worth more than $28 million with the government for rental and development of facilities adjacent to Roxham Road. What's this about?
Yes. Well, this is going to get very uncomfortable for Mr. Trudeau, because the Roxham Road entry point has become hugely problematic. It's not illegal to come through any place along the thousands of kilometers of our border and simply say, I'm a refugee, take me in. If you come to a regular border crossing, say Lacal, then you will be told you're in a safe third country, the United States, you have to stay there. So what that's meant is that we have thousands upon thousands of people every month coming through the border crossing called Roxham Road. So now all of a sudden they need some infrastructure. They need buildings and the like because there's so many people coming through. So they're building them on land of somebody who, lo and behold, is a considerable donor to the federal Liberal Party. Now, there's nothing illegal about donating to the Liberal Party or any other party federally or provincially. But what is a problem is the question of perception here. And the sums involved are massive. And this really is playing out. Sometimes you ask me, is it playing out more on the English side or on the French side? This is getting very large play on the French side in the media.
More to come. All right. Tom, Thank you very much.
Take care.